Good morning YouTubers, and welcome to my channel. What I'm going to do today is to show you how to change your rollers, your bearings, and sort your blades out on this Dewalt DW733 machine. This is the UK version of the Dewalt planer. Now the first thing I've done off camera is I've wound this up as high as I can, and I'm going to now remove the 4 bolts on top of the planer. You see, I've taken the cable off, which was wound around here. I've just tied it up a little bit and put it inside. That separates the outer casing from the wire, because we're going to be removing that. So here I go, removing, oops, I dropped one. Removing the 4 bolts. I like to keep myself a little plastic box or something to put all the parts in so I don't lose them. There's nothing more irritating than losing a nut or a washer on the floor amongst the sawdust and having to look for it. There we go. In the back of the Dewalt here there's a toolkit, some blade knife gauges, there's a small one of these Allen wrenches and a few other bits and bobs. The Allen wrench will undo this nut here. So you undo this. So you take the screw out, there's a washer there, then there's this guide, sort of measurement guide, and then this pulls off. So keep those safe. At this point you can grab the handles and this comes straight up. So there's no need to take off the yellow plastic pieces as some people do. And now you have access to what's underneath. Now the next thing I do is I place the handle back on and I lift this up as high as I possibly can, increasing the gap underneath. The higher this comes up, the easier it's going to be to service this. So keep turning it till it comes all the way up, as high as it will go. Now at this point, this clamping handle is pressing up against the bottom of the handle, so you can drop it down a bit and just keep turning. You can't clamp it actually, because if you clamp it then this won't move. So just move it as much as you can. See, it's probably about as high as it's going to go. There you go, get it as high as you can. At this point you need to take the whole machine and turn it upside down so it's resting on these 4 posts. And once you've done that, then it's possible to start servicing the machine and take out the rollers. Next step in this operation is find the side that has the on-off switch, and you'll find a plastic covering, and there are 2 screws which you need to remove on either side. These have a Phillips head, so you just unscrew those. There's one on the other side. Another 2 screws. Just going to pop those in the box, and then this plastic box should come straight up, and you can remove that, and then you have access to the drive mechanism. Now the drive mechanism is driven by this cog here. This one is attached to the motor. What it does is it drives this feed roller on that side, which has a chain attached to that spindle, which drives the other one, so the speed rollers are more or less moving in sync as they pull the wood through. Now these are held in place by these clips here. There's 3 clips and once you've undone those, these come off. Now I suggest you get yourself a pair of these. These are made by a UK company called Faithful. They do fairly good quality tools at a reasonable price, and they have these little nibs on the end that engage in these rings here. Excuse me. You can use your hand just to hold them in place, expand the ring, and then remove it. And be careful you don't let that fly across the room. There we go. So when you pull them off, you need to work equally on both sides, just sliding them forward on both sides. There we go, and you can get one off and get the other off. Then you can remove them. And you do the same with this pin here. Just remove that, and then this will come off in the same manner. So I won't show you that, but you understand how that's done. At this point you can take the side table off. You just have to undo these bolts here. So just before you take it all the way out, loosen the other one as well. There we go. There we go. So once you've taken these out, put your screws away carefully. You can now get to the rollers without any problem. Now to remove the roller, there are two retaining brackets here, one at each end. However, I couldn't undo it with a screwdriver. They were simply too tight, so I had to take a pair of vice grips. I have a small pair here. I just clamped it on the side of the screw, and that enabled me to get enough torque to break them free, and then use the screwdriver just to pull them out. So the screws come out. There are two retaining screws on either side. I am right-handed, so I'm afraid my hand will be in the way. So once they come out, this bracket comes out. You can see it's got a cutout there to go on the outside. That's in case they've made them all the same, but on the other side of the roller, the spindle of the roller protrudes through this. So they've just decided to build them all the same, save some cost. Got the same thing here. You can see the spring there just peeking up. I have a plastic box here with all the parts in so I don't lose them, which is a good idea because there are quite a few parts. So putting in those two retaining brackets, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 screws that hold that in place. Now on the end of the roller, on the shaft, you have these bearings, and basically they're just blocks of metal, and I believe these were later replaced with plastic bearings. That's all they are, and you can see the bearing shaft here has some sort of oil on it, some kind of grease I should say. That's all got to be cleaned off, and I will be re-greasing these. And on this end there's the other bearing, which suddenly doesn't want to come off. There we go. Now this bearing is no longer round. I don't know whether it's possible to see that, but the bearing, the round part is still there, and the bearing has worn itself out, has become oval. right the way over to this side. It's not so noticeable on that side, although you can see it's gone out of round. So that would allow that bearing to shift under pressure a couple of millimeters, and I believe that's what the problem was. The reason that this wasn't pushing the wood through was because the bearing was out of true. It just worn out. Why that happened exactly, I don't know. I don't know if that's a lubrication problem, or I'm really not sure what caused it. But anyway, that's why those need to be replaced. Now, the rollers themselves, this one is quite badly scored. You can see it has these lines that run all the way around it. Presumably those are nails where there's been nails in the wood. I've got a lot of scratches on the plate, which I'll show you later, where the nails have just dragged across it under pressure and gouged into the steel base plate. Also, if I put a steel ruler along there, which I'll do for you, you can see light running along. There we go. You can see it's kind of worn out in the middle quite a bit. That's where most of the wear is. Yeah, there's a look at the other one. It's a bit difficult to do this actually, but you can see the light there shining underneath. This one has a nasty gouge in it right there. And the rubber is very hard. I mean, I assume the rubber is quite hard anyway, but I decided at this point that I would get some new ones. These are the new ones. I got these online. They are perfect. The rubber feels slightly more tacky, as you might expect. So this was just a judgment call. I decided I'd get 2 new rollers since I was going to all this trouble of replacing the bearings. I don't know how worn out the spindles are on the old ones. I didn't test those. But I thought 2 new rollers, new bearings. No point in using new rollers with old bearings. So replace all the bearings, replace the rollers, and I've got a newly sharpened pair of blades which I'm going to fit. So I know the motor works well. There doesn't seem to be any problem with the chains or any of the drive mechanism. So I'm going to replace the plate, which I'll show you at the end. And this will be, for all intents and purposes, this will be like a brand new planer and should operate like a brand new planer. And as long as the motor doesn't give out, I shall get years of service out of it, much cheaper than buying a new one. I have here 4 new bearings. These are Dewalt original bearings. These are the metal ones, not the plastic variety. So before putting those back onto the shaft of the new rollers, let's get rid of these old ones for a second. They need to be greased. Now the grease that's on there seems to be like a grey grease, some sort of, really hard to say actually, there's not much of it there, but it's some kind of grey grease. However, what I'm going to use with the new ones is I'm just going to use an automotive grease. So this is wheel bearing grease, and there's nothing wrong with this. It has high anti-wear properties. It works well under high compression, as all wheel bearing grease must. So for this sort of situation it's absolutely fine, because these rollers turn quite slowly. There is some compression, but nothing sort of comparable to the weight of a car on a bearing or something like that. So I think that'll be absolutely fine. There's no need to spend a lot of money on anything expensive. Okay, so I'm going to put the roller back, so I've got everything I need close to hand. I've got latex gloves on, which I recommend. And I have my grease gun here, which has the new grease. It's been primed and all the old grease that was in the tube here has been removed. And what I'm going to do is going to put a little bit of grease on the spindle. Just work that round with my finger. Just cover the metal so it's protected. I'll do that both ends. this point I'm only going to do this part of the spindle because that's where the bearing goes. We'll look at the other part later. So just smooth it on. Make sure it's covered. You could use a brush, of course. At this point you have to take note of the orientation of the roller, and the short spindle goes on the side where the belt here is, the drive side from the motor to the blades. So just be aware of that. At this point what I'm going to do is to get a little bit of grease onto a Q-tip. It's probably a bit too much, and I'm going to put some of that in each of the bearings. I'm just working with 2 at the moment, so we've got some nice grease in there. Try to keep it inside the bearing and not all over the outside. Make sure it's covered. Okay, so I won't put that down, it's a bit dusty here, so what I'll do with that is I'll just put it directly, there we go, onto there. There's quite a bit of squeeze out there. Doing the same with this one. You don't really need a lot, I mean there's only so much room for the grease to sort of exist inside the bearing. These are very close tolerances. The grease that's on the outside of the bearing isn't really helping. It's more likely to attract dust and sawdust more than anything else, but anyway. Okay, I'll just get rid of the excess grease. Okay, you can throw that away or use it somewhere else. Then you have to replace your springs. They can go in either way, it doesn't matter. Put the 2 springs back in their retaining holes. Place your roller carefully. Now the blocks go in one way. If they go in that way, there's too much loose. They're too loose. So you put it in that way. So the widest part of the block is up and down. Do that both ends. There we go. And that's the roller greased and replaced. You can take your 2 screws. They should be long enough to reach the holes without compressing the bearing at this point. Just get them started. There we go. At the other end, place the other bracket. On the UK machine, all 4 of the brackets are identical. I've seen on some machines that they are slightly different. Some have a slotted hole for adjustment, but these don't. They don't seem to need it. So just drop your screw in, get some of the threads started. Okay, so brackets are in place, the roller and the bearings are in the right position, and then it's just a question of tightening down the bracket, which I do uniformly so as not to stress or strain anything. Give everything a bit of a turn, a bit at a time, and then these will seat themselves, the brackets will seat themselves against the metalwork of the frame here, at which point this is fitted. Now at this point, before you put the cogs on, you start adding the chains. The roller is free to move, so you can just give it a few turns just to bed down that grease. If you want to, you can just remove any excess grease here, which wouldn't be a bad idea, simply because there will be sawdust flying around at some point. You don't really want to get it all stuck in that place there. So that's well greased. I think that's great. And now you do the same thing on the other side. I'm not going to video that because it's exactly the same process. Okay, at this point we've got both rollers installed. You can see they move, I wouldn't say they move easily, they're under some tension, but that's fine. You don't want them to be loose. They don't move sideways in any way, so that's perfect. These being new are going to restore the machine quite beautifully, I'm sure. This was all done working through the front, so there isn't really any need to remove the other feed table. One feed table is fine, so I recommend doing it this way. At the moment I'm preparing this chains and the sprockets and so on to go back onto the machine, so I'm just beginning by removing the old grease. That doesn't really help us very much. I'm going to put some new grease on there. Not that these are moving parts as such, it just helps get the chains on and off, get the cogs on and off, or the sprockets. Just give those a bit of a clean. Seems to be a little bit better. So just getting a little bit of grease on my Q-tip. I'm just going to run a little bit around the inside of these sprockets. That will enable me to ease them back on. Now there's only one way that these can go back on actually, although if you didn't make a note of it when you took them apart, it's easy to get a little bit confused. So I'm putting a little bit of grease on here as well. Now this contacts here, so a little bit of grease around there. This bearing goes on here, so you want to put that on first so you don't forget. There we go. Also going to put a little bit of grease around there because the sprocket or the cog rubs against the edge of the bearing, and there's a little contoured sort of protrusion around that bearing. It's designed to make contact. So when you put them on, it seems slightly counterintuitive, but you put the sleeve part on first. I would want to put them on this way, but you put them this way. So the first thing you do is you put the one connecting the motor to the right hand roller. Now the best way to do this, since there's not a lot of room, is to try to do them at the same time. So what I do is I line up the motor tooth. There's a tooth on this cog which lines up with the shaft of the motor. Get that on there first, just a little way, and then you'll have to roll the roller to engage the teeth or the tooth onto there, and when you've got them both started, then you can seat them back without any problem, and you can see there's the space there for that retaining clip. So pretty much the same thing. There's less clearance with this one. We have two rollers that can move, so I just start by aligning one. I'll do the one furthest away from me. Just get the tooth in just a little way. It's just to start it. Whoops, that slid on quite a lot. And then going to have to try to do the same thing on this side. Just a little bit of a bind. This is the hardest part. There we go. You're going to have to arrange the roller to suit where the tooth is, because you can't turn this because it's all connected to the motor, which isn't going to turn. There we go. So once you've got those on, push them home. There we go. And finally we have to put the retaining clips on. So you need to engage the prongs into the holes on the ring. Push it all the way home. And what this does is it opens the ring up so that you can fit it. It's very easy for these things to go flying across the room, so have a finger or two ready in case that happens. So place it in position, open it up and try to get it into the groove. You might have to push it around a bit. There we go. And you can see when it's fully seated. You do the same with the other. Not quite as much room, it seems, over there. We're going to have to jiggle around this spring. We've got a post here and a post there, so it might be necessary to do this sort of vertically. I'm not sure. Or maybe from low down. Let's see how it works. That might be better. There is an offset here which helps you get around these sorts of things. It's quite useful. Anyway, have your fingers ready. It's not slotted in yet, but I've got it. As I suspected, this one's going to be a bit tight. Yeah, I believe it's in. Yeah, that's seated. If it wasn't, I couldn't pull. If it wasn't seated, I would be able to pull this off, or at least move it forward a bit. So there we go, that one's in. There we go, so it's fully seated on the tool. Not sure how that's going to work. There we go, so I've got that on. Going to push it back with a screwdriver. There we go. And you can hear that clipping in. I'm going to use the WD-40 anti-friction dry PTFE. It does show a picture of a chain here. I don't know whether that's supposed to be a bicycle chain or not, but I don't think it matters. These are not moving very fast, as I said. So get a good coating on. Should do it. Wipe off any overspill. This will dry anyway, so it doesn't leave an oily residue. Right, so now I'm replacing this cover. It just slides down, it engages in two slots at the bottom. And once that's engaged, there's a place for two screws on either side, which are these two. Just run that down. I'm not tightening it just yet, just running it down. And then the other one on the other side. Do the other side. I want to show you here the outfeed table, infeed and outfeed table. That's quite dusty. The one underneath, where the rollers push the wood down onto, is quite badly damaged. It's got some very bad pits here, and these enormous scratch marks that run all the way across. They start out here on the outfeed table, run all the way through, come out the other side. I'm not that worried about the ones on the outer tables, but underneath there I'm actually going to replace that table because I don't want anything that's going to interfere with the passage of the wood. I want the wood to slide through nice and smooth with no obstructions, no catching, no snagging, so I get the best possible planing job I can get. Now these are still available. I bought one from a Dewalt supplier. Also, it doesn't sit flush, it's sort of bouncing around where it seems to have been distorted. So this must have been done by somebody planing wood with screws sticking out and goodness knows what. I mean, why you would do that I don't know. It's the death to the blades, and you couldn't possibly get anything like a good cut. But I got a feeling, I did buy this used, and I got a feeling it was probably used on a building site or something where they weren't particularly fussy. They just needed to plane down some construction lumber in a hurry. So it's been used and abused, but with the new rollers, a new table here, new bearings and a lubrication, I believe it will be as good as new. I'm going to remove these 4 screws. Put this one in here. That one came out easily. The screwdriver is slightly too long to extract the screw completely, so I have to switch to a small one. Put the screws safely away. That's alright. Right, I couldn't undo that one earlier, so if you have a screw that's difficult to remove, get yourself a pair of vice grips. Just using a small set, and adjust it so that it will lock on tightly, like so, and then it will break free. I'll try the one at the back as well. There we go. So once you've got it started, then you can switch back to a screwdriver. There's not a lot of room under here, so you may have to be selective with your tools. Okay, and once you've done that, these 2 brackets come off, into which this plate is engaged into these 2 brackets, and then this comes off. I haven't seen this myself yet. Okay, so what we have here is an aluminium cast plate, which looks like it's been precision ground to give us a nice flat surface. I don't fully understand why they go to all that trouble and then put something like this on the top, which is all flimsy and bent. Anyway, I decided to replace this. I spent about £30, which wasn't particularly cheap. It has given me this brand new one. The only thing I noticed about this is that it's covered in a protective plastic, a nice blue plastic, which will have to come off. So I'll clean this up. I took a piece of sandpaper, just ran it down the grooves here on either side. There's some accumulation of what looked like a bit of corrosion and various deposits over the years. I'm taking this plastic off. It's nice and shiny under there. Weirdly enough, there are a few scratches on the plate which must have happened, very small. Must have happened while this is in the shop and storage. Right. So there's a little bit on the front there. There we go. So this is going back. This should provide a nice slick surface. Right, you see it fits absolutely flat. There's no movement there at all, as opposed to the other one which was bouncing all over the place. So I'm going to screw that back, and that should provide a superb surface for the wood to go through, just like a new planer. So I'm just cleaning the bracket here, getting rid of anything that might get in the way. What this actually does is it keeps this down onto the onto the table of the planer, but it also guides any wood that's coming along. It has these buffers here which sort of move it into the area of cut. If these weren't here, the wood could sort of roll off to the side, or it wouldn't be cut and get jammed. So they serve two purposes. So they go like that. There's two small tongues that engage in there that stick out from the plate. And then we just put those screws back that I took out. So they just go back in their holes. There we go. It's a bit difficult to do this on camera. You get the idea. So you put those in. Put all four of those in. I'll be using this mostly for sort of cabinet making and carpentry. I've got some gates to build. It's not going to be subject to any bad timber. It's going to do damage. I also have one of those metal detectors, so if I'm using wood, if I'm resurfacing or reshaping or resizing any wood that's not new, which I do quite often, I use the metal detector to be absolutely sure there's no nails or anything in the wood or lumber. The trouble is, once you hit a nail, you take a chip out of both blades in line with the nail, and forever after, unless you resharpen your blades, you end up with a sort of groove. Well, it's not a groove actually, it's a slight lift where the wood is not being cut down to the right size because the tip of the blade is missing. So anyway, must try to keep your wood pure when you push it through here. In order to get the cover back on, you need to wind it down, otherwise the cover won't fit. It will catch on the top of the motor. So you can do that. What I would suggest first though is just to give these pillars and the thread some dry PTFE, just to help lubricate it, because they do need it. And then start winding it down. There we go. It's going quite easily now. I'm replacing the cover. As you can see, I didn't take the yellow plastic side panels off. It's not necessary. When you replace it, make sure you get the hold for the handle on the proper side, depending which side you're standing, of course. And there's this recess here for the crank, so you can see which way it goes. Just offer it over the top carefully. Make sure you don't crack the wire. Engage the plastic sides into the groove, and then I can see already that the screw holes are perfectly lined up. It's nice to see it all going back together actually. It's looking very nice. I bought this from a boot sale. It was always a little bit iffy, and I think that's largely because of that bearing, although at the time I didn't realise. I was fiddling about with the rollers, I was trying to clean them, and I used various rubber improvers like Rubber Renew and this and that, and none of it worked. And it was only when I took it apart so I could have a good look at the rollers did I realise that in fact it was the bearing, and that the rollers were pretty bad anyway. Now you might think I could have done just the bearings and not worried about the rollers, and you might be right, but I just wanted to get it all done, you know. So the handle has a step in it which corresponds to the step on the shaft. Push that on. Next goes this sort of pressure washer. It's designed to give it a little bit of clearance so you can turn this but also hold it firmly when needed. And then I couldn't find the washer that was supposed to be on there, so I found one in my own supply that's about the right size and seems to work okay. So you put the bolt and tighten that down. What happens is the bolt bottoms out. That tightens like that. That little spring gives a little bit of clearance, that spring washer I was showing you underneath here. So this can be pushed down and turned, and then when you set it the way you want it, it just comes up and is held by friction. So I mean, you don't even have to push it down, you can just turn it. So it's free, but it's fairly stiff for setting your depth of cut. Now the last part of this video, I'm going to replace the blades with sharpened new blades. The old blades will go off to be resharpened. So there's a little Allen wrench in the toolkit at the back here, which is good for this nut, or for this bolt, this thing here. So we take that out, put it somewhere safe, take the other one out. At which point you can lift this whole piece out, and that reveals the blades. You can see them here. Now on the right hand side there's a little piece of metal here. It's like a little lever, and it's a locking lever. What it does is if you push it forward from the top, it engages in this blade cylinder and stops it from moving. It kind of keeps it still. At which point you can take this tool, which was also in the toolkit, and use it to undo the nuts that are, or the bolts that are holding this blade in place. Right, at which point you can take them out. Okay, there we go. And this is designed, it has these little springs here, and that's there for a reason. That helps keep this blade in position while you set it. And now you should be able to take the blade out. You might want to release the catch maybe and just turn it slightly. It seems to be stuck. I've got a piece of wood here which I think will lift the blade off. There we go. Carefully take your blade out. I'm looking along the edge and I can see in two places. I can see it here and here where the blade has hit some nails. At this point I'm just giving everything a wipe down with acetone on a piece of paper, tissue paper. That seems to work quite well on the metal work. Getting in there, giving that a little bit of a clean. That's nice and clean now. There's a little bit of rust along there, but it's only surface rust. There's a little bit more of that sap there that's coming out with the acetone. So after a few minutes of cleaning with the acetone, this is all clean now. So that's ready to take the new blades. I managed to get all that off the back there. So it's all in good shape. I've got to the point now where I'm going to put the blades back. To do this you'll need the blade covers, your 2 knife gauges, a spanner. This one came with the machine and the toolkit, just like a 10mm and an 8mm. To start with, 4 of the bolts. In my case I've got a new set of blades which I just purchased. I've sent the other ones off to be sharpened, so I've got 2 sets. So if this one, when this one needs replacing, when they get dull or damaged possibly, I'll put the ones that are sharpened back in the machine and send these off for sharpening. So I've always got 2 pairs, so I can always have sharp blades in the machine. So first thing I'm going to do is to open the new blades. They came from a place called woodfordtooling.com. That was an eBay purchase. They were £28. You can get these sorts of things cheaper from China, but I read the reviews and they said that they took up to 6 weeks to deliver, so obviously that's not suitable. Not while I'm making a video. So I've scored along the package on the back side of the blades where there won't be any damage done to the blade itself. These blades are covered in oil, it seems like, a thin layer of oil, stop them rusting in the packet, and they've been put together with the backs of the blades touching. So at this point you must be very careful not to damage your blades. So the first thing you need to do is to take your spring-loaded blade cap or blade cover, and we need to get that temporarily installed on the cutter cylinder. And for that you'll need 2 bolts. So just line it up and put 2 bolts, 1 at each end, just lightly, you don't need to push them in all the way. And what that does is it holds it in place, but also enables it to lift up and down, so you can get the blade in. Now, next thing is to tip it back. Take your newly sharpened blade and carefully slide it between the cutter cylinder and the blade cover, in which case you've got to lift up this side of it. Okay, and what will happen is the slots on either end, the open slots, will engage with the 2 nuts, and you'll notice that it's sprung loaded here. That's the way it's supposed to be. Now the next step is to take your gauges, they're called knife gauges or cutter gauges, and you're going to apply it to the blade, and it's going to sit on this part of the cutter cylinder, and you'll see that it's contoured for that. Now you've got a magnet here that contacts the top of this part of the cylinder, and then it's stepped right here, not at 90 degrees, a little bit more than 90 degrees, but there's a flat surface here, and then it's the curved surface which corresponds to the curved surface here. What you need to do is to get this step against the back edge here, the flat edge where the other plain blade will be attached. Put it right there. This bit here will hug this, and then the other part, the front part, will provide the correct relief of the blade, because it will actually hold it in place. And you need to do 1 each end. Now you're going to have to hold this down by hand. I'll do the left hand side first. Hold it down by hand until you get this bit fitted. And that one's right. I'll switch hands and do the other side. Okay. So just double check that the back of the knife gauge is firmly seated against the back edge. That's the tricky bit that's not actually very clear in the instructions. that it's seated properly, and for that you can just depress the blade slightly. And when it's seated properly, the blade under spring tension will come up and rest against the front edge of the knife gauge. It's just slightly underneath it, but that's what it needs to be. Now very carefully, if you can wind them in by hand a bit more, do so. Just wind those bolts in, being very careful not to dislodge. There we go, just don't dislodge the knife gauge. At this point I'm just going to recheck, because there may have been some compression of the blade. It may have compressed it onto the cylinder a little bit, so just double check, make sure everything's the way it should be, which it is, it hasn't moved. And then take your spanner and take the largest of the two ends. Just easy, don't overdo it, and don't knock the knife gauges against the body of the planer here, because that will shift everything. Just turn this round a little bit. Just gently snug it up. Okay, so this one's fairly tight now. Go back to this one. So I'm hand tightening them. Okay. At this point, just double check that the gauge is exactly seated the way it should be, which it is, and you can remove the gauges. And those two bolts there will hold the blade where it needs to be. Now the next thing you need to do is to lock the blade there. Okay, so this locking lever has gone into play. It's just dropped down, and you can see the bolts that have yet to be installed. So the next thing then is to take your bolts, just running each one in hand tight. And then with this other tool that should be in your toolkit, it's basically a 10mm wrench, you just tighten these down. Now once again, don't just tighten them all don't tighten each one at a time, just work your way along. I'm just snugging these up. I'm sort of torquing them by hand just to get them, already done that one, and go back a little bit tighter, doing every other one at this point. Okay, now I'll just work my way along final time. Not too tight, but so they don't come undone, obviously. Snug them all up. Okay, you can release this, and then that is one blade installed. And the next thing you have to do is to turn this through 180 degrees and repeat the process. You can see now I've got both blades installed. There's one there. Turn it around. And there's the other one. So they're in now. That's basically all you have to do to replace the blades. And then you have to reinstall the cover here, which is your toolkit. It also provides a downdraft from the motor to blow the chippings away. One last thing you might want to consider is if you wish to clean this out more effectively and more thoroughly, you can undo the top here. Don't lose your screws. And the reason I'm doing this is because I can see there's lots of wood, dust, all kinds of weird stuff. A lot of it's green. I have no idea what that is. So I'm going to get rid of it all. So there are 4 Phillips screws with washers that need to be removed. And yeah, it does seem quite loose. Oh, there we go. Okay. I don't know what that was. So basically I just want to clean all this out. All the stuff. I'm going to put that in the bin. So I've given that a clean. I don't think it was glue. I think what happened here is that this foam had been glued on at some point, and the adhesive had just sort of spilled out, wasn't done very well. So it looked like it had been glued, it was just stuck because it hadn't been taken off before. So replacing it, put the 4 screws back, and I think you're good to go. Everything's clean again. There we go. So just put the screws back the way you took them out. So the last thing that is needed to be done here is to replace this cover. This has the toolkit on it. You can see there's some foam here, around here, which compresses against this and the underside of the motor to seal it. That wire is probably in the way. Let's push that out of the way. There we go. Now this is what a properly kitted out toolkit should look like. You have the long right angle wrench for the blade, this starting spanner here to get the blades to the 2 screws I showed you started. Then there's one of these Allen keys here. Now that key just so happens to fit the 2 bolts needed to put this tray back. So I think what I'll do is I'll just engage it in here first. That's better. I can't get my fingers in there. Get that started. And there's one on the other side, same thing. But over here, cable, the sheath on this cable has broken off, and I've noticed around here where it goes through this retaining clip it's also broken. So at this point, since this is inside the machine and it's not going to come into any contact, I'm just going to wrap insulation tape around it. It probably would be better to have replaced it, but at this point I'm not going to do that. That may be a job for another time. So basically that's it. That's how you set up your planer. That's how you replace the rollers, replace the bearings, replace the blades. There's not much else you can really do except possibly replacing the bearings on the cutters, on the cutter head assembly, but I don't believe this machine needs that. They seem to be okay, there's no movement and they turn quietly. So for now, that's the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed it and I hope you've learned something. And please subscribe and help this channel grow. And leave a comment, I can help you possibly. And thumbs up always helps increase the traffic. Thanks again. Thank you for watching.